Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Learn with Jason. Today on the show, we've got Aryan Deora. How you doing?
Hi there. Yeah, it's been great. Thanks for having me over, Jason. This is very exciting.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have you on the show. I have been watching you kind of emerge onto the scene. You're building really cool stuff, which is actually how you ended up here. As I saw this incredible demo that you did where you had a bunch of different frameworks talking to each other, which kind of blew my mind. And that's what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be figuring out how to make all these different frameworks talk to each other. But before we talk about that, let's talk a little bit about
Sure.
you.
Okay.
For folks who aren't familiar with you or your work, do you want to give us a bit of a background on who you are and what you do?
Yeah, definitely. Hi everyone. My name is Aryan. I'm a software engineer living in Indiana, working with Global Knock at Indiana University. I work as a front-end developer on the UI team. I'm also very big on open source. Just got involved with it last year, and it's been an amazing journey to talk with very talented folks and just interacting with really amazing people in the ecosystem. I am a maintainer of this library called Solid.JS, which helps you create toast animations for toast notifications for Solid.JS components. I also wrote the TanStack virtual adapter for Solid.JS. So that's something that you can use to create scroll virtualizations. Um, I'm currently working on Solid Query dev tools, and I'm also a maintainer at TanStack Query, working specifically on the Solid.js adapter because since it's a relatively newer framework, it needs to catch up with the feature parity of React Query.
Yeah.
So yeah, so a lot of interesting stuff, a lot of exciting stuff, and yeah, I've been actually watching the Learn with Jason show since I started learning how to code, and it's been very inspirational seeing all folks coming from like different backgrounds talk about tech that they're very interested in, and yeah, it's great to talk about tech that I'm interested in, which is Astro and TanStack.
Yeah. I definitely think there is yeah, lots of fun stuff happening in the community right now, and you seem to be kind of in the same area that I find really exciting, which is around this like this it almost feels like we're moving to a post framework mindset about building, which is
Yeah.
so exciting to me, where it kind of feels like we're treating our our frameworks as compiler. I don't know, like meta compilers maybe. Like the let me back up and say that in words that
Mhm.
make sense to somebody who's not me.
Sure.
So, but so it seems like with Vite, with Astro, with a lot of the tooling that's coming out, there's with TanStack as well. There's this move toward let's make tools that work, and which
Mhm.
framework you choose, React, Solid, Svelte, Vue, whatever, is kind of
Mhm.
incidental. It's no longer the core of what you're
Yes.
building. You're building a thing and you can feed it a React component or a Vue component, and
Mhm.
the compiler doesn't care. Astro doesn't care if you're
Yes.
using no framework or any framework, and TanStack is getting increasingly more agnostic. Something that used to be all in on React, like React Query, is now abstracted out to TanStack Query. It works with, I think, everything. Um, and that to
Mhm.
me is such an exciting space to be in because I don't know. It feels like it sort of feels to me the same way that I felt about the web when we saw the shift from like no JavaScript frameworks to
Mhm.
jQuery and MooTools and I this may be a little before some of y'all's time, but it was a really exciting time where it felt like there was just motion. There was so much innovation happening. And then we saw the same thing around the beginning of the React explosion, right? Where the
Uh-huh.
ecosystem was bubbling and so much was happening. NPM had the same kind of thing. Like Node just had this huge explosion of like people innovating and building stuff, and we can build JavaScript on the browser or in the server now. Like, holy crap. Um, what's your read on the situation? Like, if you've been watching my stuff since you started programming, I'm assuming that you've been programming for like what the last How long have you been in the industry?
So I started learning how to code 5 years ago, I think
Okay.
approximately 5 years ago.
Okay.
So it's been recent, but I started off learning like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and started my journey with jQuery. So I've definitely been through the ringer with the JavaScript ecosystem. But coming back to your point, it's been great to see how these different tools have been working on making their core like framework agnostic, and that's what makes it really interesting to be in this space. Coming to like Astro, right? You can talking about how it has this islands architecture, which frames very nicely with the framework agnostic philosophy that they have, is that you can have islands of interactivity on your like mostly static page, and that interactivity can be written in any framework. So you can have like a React component for your search button, or and then you can have like a feed that's written in Solid.JS, and you can have another widget that's written in Svelte and whatever, and they can all be working side by side, and that enables a lot of exciting things that you could do. It also leads into like, I believe, like newer patterns and what do you call it? Newer patterns in how we structure our web frameworks. So that's what TanStack Start is working on, right? There's a newer talk about the TanStack becoming like a meta framework, and they're building it on top of Astro, right? So Astro, it actually builds on top of Vite, and
Right.
Vite offers like a SSR story where it's like a low-level API
Yeah.
to do SSR for each framework that you would like to do. But doing it by manually for each framework takes long time. It's going to be a lot of work to get it working with everything. But Astro has figured it all out, right? It has
Right.
done the SSR, CSR for Svelte, Vue, Lit, React, Solid.JS components. You have basically all like mainstream frameworks working with Astro. So it's an exciting time to build on top of Astro, where you can use Astro's ability to do all of this dehydrating and hydrating all that stuff on the client to create a meta framework on top of it. So really exciting time for Astro and how this ecosystem will evolve. I'm very excited for it.
Yeah, I think like specifically the idea of islands or partial hydration or however you want to frame it, you know, just not
Mhm.
shipping JavaScript when you don't need JavaScript, right?
Yep.
Is one of those things that once I heard it, I was like,
Yeah.
well, yeah, of course we should be doing that. Why haven't we been doing that? And I
Yeah.
know why. It's because it's hard.
Yeah.
Right? Like there are a lot of reasons that make this extremely challenging. And I think that's why people are
Mhm.
so excited about Astro right now is that, you know, Astro has cracked something that I think a lot of us were thinking in the back of our heads is like, well, why don't I just
Yep.
like only hydrate the component that I need? And then we'd start thinking about it and we'd go, yeah, that's too hard. I'm not going to do that. Well,
Mhm.
the Astro team decided it was worth pushing through that pain. They built it, they got it running. Um,
Yeah.
and one of the things that I think is a common piece of pushback on this is like, okay, but as soon as you get any like really interactive app, you have to hydrate the whole
Mhm.
thing anyway. So why bother? Right.
Yeah.
And that is what you cracked that I'm really excited to see today because
Yeah.
you've come up with a pattern. And I don't know that this is this is a pattern that has been possible, but you've got a really good, like poignant example of using it where you
Mhm.
can plug together different islands that are independently hydrated, right? So let me clarify. But what you built was like 4 different buttons, one in
Mhm.
each one in a different framework. And
Yeah.
you've got the state of like I click one button and the state of all 4 updates. And so
Correct.
in and of itself that's very impressive, but also if I am understanding correctly, the rest of that page where those 4 islands are sitting, that's not hydrated, right? So we've got 4 islands that are the only things that are interactive on the page, and everything else is just static HTML and CSS.
Yeah. And we're working towards something where it's going to be much more easy to server-side render the queries for the first request. So you'll have like a fully formed HTML when you first view it. And then every time you make a new request, it does it on the client. So you get the best of both worlds.
Oh, so you're saying like, because another pushback that you hear about some of the Astro stuff is like, oh, but you don't want full page refreshes when you click links and stuff. You want that SPA experience. And I've seen we had an episode on this that I'm going to pull up right now. It was it was like page transitions. Yes, this was a very cool episode. We had Maxi. I tried to say his name on the show and I shouldn't have done it. And I'm not going to try it now because I will murder it. It's got a double R and I can't
saw that
my R's.
show yesterday.
But it was we did the page transitions API with Maxi. It was super fun. Creates that SPA experience in Astro. And so what you're doing, Aryan, is putting together shared stores. So let's talk a little bit about the mechanics of that, because honestly, like with the shared page transition API, with this idea of shared stores, we're rapidly chipping away at any reason why you would say, well, it's worth adding an extra 2 megabytes of JavaScript so that I get app-like experiences. The platform is sort of showing up, and these patterns for sharing state are showing up to really undermine any value in that argument. And it's really starting to feel like, no, you shouldn't. You shouldn't ship that extra 2 megabytes of JavaScript just to get page transitions. You can do that with the platform. No, you shouldn't ship extra 2 megabytes of JavaScript so that you can have, like, you know, a cart icon and a add to cart icon that are connected, because you don't need to hydrate the whole page to make that happen anymore. So at a high level, let's talk a little bit about how this functions. Like, it sounds like magic that you would be able to take state out of React and put that state into Solid. They're different storage mechanisms. They don't really, they're not compatible. You can't take a React hook and drop it into Solid. So how does this work?
Yeah, so we'll talk about this in the example as well. But to give you a higher overview of how things work is that every framework or every library has, let's go back to the UI components, right? There is React, there's Svelte, and each of these Svelte components have their own life cycles, right? So you can't just plug in a signal, Solid.JS signal in Svelte and expect it to work, because, or you cannot put a signal in React and expect it to just work out of the box, because a signal doesn't know about how to re-render a React component. So you need like reactive wrappers for each library. But that's all you need. All the core logic can still remain in like a framework agnostic JavaScript, vanilla JavaScript core. And we can just write reactive wrappers for each framework. So that's how TanStack Query works. There's like a TanStack Query core, which has all the logic for storing the queries, storing the query caches. And then you write reactive wrappers. So you write one for Solid Query, which just subscribes to that client. And then when it updates, we update in a way that it updates the lifecycle of a Solid component. That happens the same way in React. So whenever the query updates somewhere, we actually re-render the component. So that's how that's what the main principle of framework agnostic tooling is.
So to step back and say even more plainly, like the secret sauce here is TanStack Query, because what like the way that it functions is that TanStack Query is managing like queries based on caching keys. And so if we use the same, we can pull in the Solid use query from TanStack Query, and we can pull in the React version, the Svelte version, etc. If they're using the same query keys, then they don't need to be aware of what frameworks are using it. They just need, like, only TanStack Query needs to be aware of what's going on. Very, very cool.
Yeah, and that philosophy extends out to any JavaScript library that you want to implement. We'll also be talking about this other library called nanostores, which implements the exact same. So imagine like an external store, but you write reactive wrappers for each one of these frameworks, and then you can subscribe to like a external store like Zustand or something like that.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Very, very cool. All right. So let's see. I don't think I have any questions that aren't going to be easier for you to show me than tell me. So why don't we switch over into the pair programming view here? And I'm going to start by, actually, let me do a quick shout to our live captioning. So this episode, like every episode, is being live captioned. We've got Rachel here with us from Whitecoat Captioning today. Thank you, Rachel. And that is made possible through the support of our sponsors. Netlify, NX, New Relic, and Pluralsight are all kicking in to make this show more accessible to more people, which I very much appreciate. If you want to get those live captions, there is a closed caption button right there on the Twitch interface. So just hover over your Twitch player and you can see them there. If you're watching this later on YouTube, captions are also there. And we are talking to Aryan today, so make sure you go and follow on Twitter. And then let's see, we mentioned TanStack. So I'm going to drop a link to TanStack real quick, and we mentioned the nano stores briefly, so I'll drop a link to those. And from here, I'm not sure what to do next. So what should my next move be?
Yeah, so I created like a example repository, which I think you've already cloned. So let's try to go into the repository for VS Code.
Okay, so I have the code here. I'm going to open it up in VS Code.
Yep.
And here is our repo. So I'm going to open this.
Yes.
Not that one. Open this up bigger.
All and right. So if you look at that, it's a simple Astro project. If you look at the source directory, you'll see pages where we have all our pages. So index is where we'll start off. And then first we'll talk about the nanostores.astro. So if you do pnpm or like npm run dev, it should open the project for you.
Okay. All right, so I've got this project running in, whoa, what was that button? Okay, so we got these there. I'm going to take this one, put it over here, and we're going to open up localhost 3000.
Yes.
All right, so that is our project.
So the first, like the index.astro just contains the links to all the examples that we had. So let's take a look at the first link, which is nanostores plus introduction. Introduction. Okay. So now we're starting off with the frameworks adding to this. So we have like a simple counter right now.
Yes.
So we can go take a look at how this counter component works right now.
Okay.
So it should be inside components and inside the nanostores. Yes. And it should be inside React counter, which will contain the React counter, and solid counter, which contains the solid counter. So this is a very typical counter component, right? You just have using useState to keep a track of the count, and then you have add and subtract functions to set the count when it increased or decreased, right? Similarly, on the solid counter, it's the exact same thing if you look at that component. Yeah, so instead of using useStore, we use create signal, and we do the exact same thing there, right? Yep. But if you right now increase or decrease the counter, it only increases or decreases the counter on the individual components.
Right.
And we don't there's we don't have a way to share this state between these two components. How do we share a counter between React and Solid? Can we use hooks outside React components? I don't think so, right? Similarly, if we put the counter or like the signal in React, we can't do the exact same thing.
Right.
Because a signal, even though it updates, you can still put it inside a React function. Anytime it updates, we'll have to do like a set state inside a create effect or something like that. So you have to run like effect. So that's, again, not really an ideal position to be at. So this is where what you need to do is you need to extract that store or like the variable or like the state outside the component tree and keep it in an external object. And this is where nanostores comes in.
Okay.
So there's another file on the nanostores directory called store.ts. Yeah, so this is where we're importing an atom. So atom is like an atomic state that you can define for a variable. And this is where you, when you see the function on, or like the variable on line 4, we're creating a counter variable and calling the atom function. So you're creating like a external store or like a state variable with just a number. You can put in arrays, you can put in objects, you can put in whatever you want over there.
And so the idea here is that with nanostores, nano implying that they're small, you are when you set up an atom is kind of, it would be like one use state is what you would put in an atom. So if our counter is a number, then our atom would be the same thing. It's a number. If we had multiple things we needed to track, like a username, an email, a thing like that, we would we be creating like an atom that has a big nested object in it, or are you creating multiple atoms for like unrelated data?
Yeah, you could do both. You could certainly have, I think there's a way to select a certain part of the nested property if you just want to track just one of them.
Got it.
When you subscribe to that. But yeah, it should work similarly to how Redux works, where you can select a piece of the state. Redux, Jotai, they all work on the same principle, but yeah, we'll see why nanostores works here best.
Okay.
So right now, if we go back to the React counter, yeah, now instead of the count and set count, can we create a new, so just comment that out and create a new variable const count equals, you have to do use store.
And that's here. Okay.
Yes. So it comes from the nanostores/React library. So this is the reactive wrapper that I was talking to you about. We are subscribing to a store or an atom, right? So you have to provide an atom inside that function. So you have to put in the counter that we just exported and imported in our counter.
And that's this one. So this came out of store. So we're exporting this counter. We're grabbing it here, and then we're telling, in this case, React, to use that counter.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. Now, add and subtract won't work, right? We need to change that in a certain way to update the counter store or like the counter atom now. Okay. So instead of set count, we'll do, I think it is const add equals, it's just going to be an arrow function, and it will be counter dot set, I think. Yes. And in there, you can just put count +1.
Okay. And then we can duplicate that.
Subtract as well.
Okay.
And let's save it and see if we're getting it to work. So if you increase the count, yes. So now it's working correctly.
So it's doing the thing.
So now it's subscribed to the counter atom for the React counter.
And it's using a nano store instead of React state. So that and this is everything, right? So where did this client come in? Like, where are we actually using that?
We're going to be talking about that in just a little bit.
Okay.
So first, we're just setting up like a counter store, and then we get to the client itself.
And so this counter, the counter store works without, like, we don't need a provider, we don't need a like wrapper components or anything. This is all of the code. This counter, the use count, and then these add, subtract, and then what we're exporting here. That's the entirety of putting nano stores into React.
Yes.
Very cool. Okay. All right.
Yes. Now we can do the same on the solid counter component. So let's go there.
Okay. So here is our solid component. I'm going to bring this back up actually, because I don't think that it's super valuable for us to have all of them together. So I'm gonna put this here, and then we want counter or count equals use store counter.
Correct.
All right. And then for these,
so over here,
we can copy paste, right?
A little bit. So over here, what you're getting is a count signal, not a count. So that's what I was talking about, the reactive wrappers, right? They handle how each framework handles their internal state. So instead of setting counter.set, so that works fine, but you'll have to do count with the parentheses there.
And that is because with a signal, count is a function that returns its value instead of being the value itself, which is
correct.
If you are not familiar with signals, that's probably a whole other discussion to get into that we're not gonna have a ton of time for today. So, but okay. So is that it?
Yeah. So let's save that. And now,
oh my God, that was too easy.
Yes, it's amazing how
this is absolutely incredible, because again, the outer part of this app is not hydrated. So this is an island, this is an island, this is React, this is Solid, and these are freaking connected to each other now. Like, holy crap, that is so freaking cool.
Yeah, it just blew my mind when I first tried it out. I'm like, wow, this is really cool. So this is how you handle client state and share client state between different islands of different frameworks. And it's pretty simple. But when you have like a client-side app, you're also thinking about like fetching data, right? You need to show data from an API that you fetch from an endpoint, or do like an RPC. That's the new buzzword going around. So how do we handle like fetching state with nano stores? You'll have to do like, you have to like create a way to fetch the data when the counter changes, and then handle loading states and error states and success states. If only there was another library that was framework agnostic, right?
If only. This is like very like an infomercial, you know, where you show somebody like, are you sick of trying to figure out how to store all your Tupperware? And they open a cupboard and it just like cascades out at them. It's like, have I got the thing for you?
Exactly. So that's where TanStack Query jumps in, right? Again, like we talked about, there is a query client. If you've ever worked with TanStack Query, which has the brains of TanStack Query inside it, which keeps a track of the cache. It keeps a track of all the queries that have been made anywhere around the app, and it stores like a single source of truth. So to get that working, so we'll still be on the first.
We will. Okay.
Link. Yes. And if you go to store.ts.
Into store.ts.
So that's where we're creating a new query client, right? So
Okay,
we
and
just
this is
created
coming out of TanStack
TanStack
Query
Query.
core. Got it.
Yes. And now we have the query client set up.
Okay.
Let's go back to the React counter. And after subtract, you can create a new variable called Pokemon query. So we'll be actually walking through the Pokemon API. Have you ever
Okay.
used it?
I'm familiar with it. I feel like I've made a couple calls, but I've never built, like, I feel like everybody's built a Pokedex at some point, maybe except me.
Okay. Yes. So we'll be walking through the Pokemon API as an example for all of our examples.
Okay.
So there is a hook called use Pokemon that I just created. So yeah. And if you go there, if you look at it should be below.
Below.
The
Oh, use Pokemon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. So it's just the use query function, which creates a query key with the count, which we will pass in the use Pokemon function.
Okay.
And we will get Pokemon, which is just the fetcher function to get a Pokemon for you.
Okay. So
what the count is.
We do have, if you're interested, a full episode on query. Oops, if I can spell it right. Here. I know we're using V5 today, but I'm relatively certain that there aren't a ton of breaking changes in V5, right? Like it's more just new functionality.
So right now we're using TanStack Query V5, the alpha version right now. It's still early, accepting any. We're not expecting like breaking changes mostly, but this is how we'll be using React Query from here.
Got it.
If you notice here, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, at a high level, let's talk through a little bit about what exactly is happening here for folks who haven't seen TanStack Query before. And so we pass in an object, like a configuration object, and the query key is something unique to the query that will cause it to be invalidated. So that's why the count is in here, because if we just called it Pokemon, it would cache. And when we change the count, nothing would change. It would be like, here's your Pokemon. But by adding the count, then Pokemon 1 is unique. So whenever it's 1, that's cached. Pokemon 2 is unique and cached. And so this is how you kind of specify what should and shouldn't be managed by TanStack Query in terms of caching and invalidation across the app and all that. And then query function, this is just telling TanStack Query how to get the data, right?
Yeah, exactly. And now in V5, we are introducing a way. So if you've ever used TanStack Query before, what we had to do is provide like a query client provider at the top level of the app to provide the query client for the hooks to be subscribed to. Right. So when you use query, it used to look at the query client provided from the query client provider. But now we have an option to provide a query client right inside use query. So you can have multiple.
This feels, so this is sneaky because this doesn't look like very much, but this is magic, because if this removes the need for a provider component, it's just nice to not have to use provider components. Like I don't know why I have added a million provider components. It's not actually that big of a deal, but I just don't like it. Like, I don't know why. I've never liked it. It's like when you're a kid and you don't want to put on your coat. Like, I don't want to put on another provider. But this also, by eliminating the provider component, I'm going to make a guess that this is what allows us to share that client between any framework, because the client is not React. The client, if we look again, is the core, not the React TanStack or the TanStack React query or Solid query or whatever. This is just a generic TanStack query. Oh, yeah, this is so cool. Okay.
Yeah, but to preface this, we could still use it with v4, but we'll, instead of making a React counter, we'll have to make like a React counter parent, where you'll have to provide the query in like a query client provider, and then create render the React counter inside it. But that eliminates the need to create like a parent component. So it's easier when you're doing like cross framework stuff.
Gotcha.
So yeah, so now if you go back up, we'll use this query in the Pokemon query. So you'll just do use Pokemon, and then you'll just put in the count value in there. Yes, and if you scroll down a little bit, there are two things that are commented out. So you can uncomment those, both of them.
Okay, yes. And so this is
the
dev tools, great, and then we're just going to drop the Pokemon data out.
Yeah, so we're just showing the Pokemon's name. So now you see that it's Bulbasaur showing up, and we have React Query DevTools showing up on the bottom left.
Got it.
Yeah, so let's do the same thing on the Solid counter as well. So we'll subscribe to the Solid Pokemon. So we'll also make a Pokemon query again. And it will be use Pokemon, and you'll just provide it the count.
Okay. And looking down here for the use Pokemon, this is identical, except for this is actually why are these ones like this?
Yeah, so the reason why we have the options be a function that returns the query options is because we have to keep things reactive, right? And how Solid.JS keeps things reactive is that if anything is inside a function scope, whenever stuff changes, we can track those changes when it's a function. So we could extract this out inside a memo, and then you can provide a memo also inside it. That's when you use like count, when you do count function, you're calling that function, right? So this is how we create like a tracked context.
Got it. Okay, cool. Very cool.
So pretty similar, we'll just uncomment that as well. And now we have the queries showing up in both places.
And notice that the first time I get to a number, it has a second to load, and then it's cached. So I've gone up to 9. So 9 is cached, 10 won't be. So you get that little bit of a lag.
Yeah. Two things to show here. So if you go on the Query DevTools on the left-hand side, you'll see there's like a yellow with 2 on there. So there are 2 query observers. So even though we're using React Query DevTools, it knows about the queries that were mounted on the Solid.JS component as well.
Oh, cool.
So this is where the cross framework is like working here, right, in action, where you can use different tools. So you can have like a React component do stuff for a Solid.JS component.
Okay, so hold on. Does that mean that if there's not a Solid Query DevTools, I could build my whole thing with Solid, but then have one React component during dev that was the React Query DevTools, and I would still get all the DevTools?
Yep.
That's incredible. I mean, somebody in the chat earlier said, I think Jazzy Pants said that it's such a game changer for like incremental migration stories that you can combine these things together with so little refactoring. And stuff like this, like making the React Query DevTools available to any framework through this partial hydration story and nano stores, that is freaking incredible. Like it just makes the whole thing so good. Like it's just a very nice story and something that you can really see actually working. Like, oh, I could actually move my whole app to Solid without losing all this stuff.
Yep. One other thing that I would like to point out, so I'm going to make you manage a lot of windows, is if you can open the DevTools on the browser. So is it possible to see the network tab?
Yeah, let's do it.
So you can close the React Query DevTools.
Okay.
So you just have to press on the button, yes. And take a look at the network fetches that are being made.
Okay. So.
So
Oh, it 404'd for me on 0, and that makes sense because there is one.
But you'll have to maybe close the console.
But I think close the console. Oh yeah, so there's my 404, and now 12 is the highest I've gone so far. So when I go to 13, there is our actual query. 14 actual query, and never again until we hit a number I haven't hit.
So did you see that even though we're updating the query on both of these components, we're only making one network call?
Yep.
That's because TanStack Query dedupes that data between different accesses. So wherever you're accessing the data, we only fetch that data once.
That is
for that same query key. So
extremely cool.
Yeah. So, yeah.
So,
a lot of,
I mean, so there's a lot going on in here. And what I think is important to note is, like, for me as a dev, these are all things that I want to be true. Like, I always want to dedupe my requests. I always want to cache until data changes. I always want to make sure that I'm sending the minimum amount of JavaScript. But the challenge for most of my career has always been that doing those things is extremely hard and really finicky.
yes.
And so I would always maybe I'd get it right at the initial build because I'd have the time and energy to like really crank through and get it right. And then as requirements change, as things kind of evolve, the app gets more complex. I don't have the time. I don't have the scope. Like, you know, I'm being told to build new features. I don't have time to go back and like re-edit everything I've ever written before. So my home-rolled deduping, my home-rolled cache invalidation starts to age and starts to deteriorate. And it just falls apart over time. And that's not because, I mean, it's partially because I'm a bad dev, but it's mostly because that's just how real world dev works, is you never get the chance to go back and fix all the code you've ever written whenever a new requirement comes in.
Yeah.
So what I find so exciting about this stuff is that with these new tools, like if you use TanStack Query, if you use Astro, these ideas of like only shipping the JavaScript you need, of automatically caching and deduping and all this stuff, that's no longer a thing you have to go back and maintain, right? Like that's why your company should be donating to the OSS teams that are doing this work for you, is that they're preventing bugs. They are, you know, like Aryan is out here doing all this maintenance for you so that you don't have to. And that is huge. It's such a enormous boon to the community that I can go out there and write this query once and know that it's going to be deduped and cached properly and, you know, super fast and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Hot damn. This is really cool, Aryan. I'm really like, I'm very like, I don't know, I'm fired up about this. This is just very cool stuff. It feels like a big step forward for us as a community.
Yeah, it's whenever I try to do anything with TanStack Query, it's just very exciting. I just love developing with these tools that I think you mentioned it when Dominique was on stream, that some things just, when it's like really delightful to work with, it's just a great heuristic if it's a library is awesome or not. I think I saw Dominique in the chat say, why are there no background updates? So usually we fetch data even when we're showing the cached values. The Pokemon API that we're using has a separate cache of itself. So that's why if it's already fetched a Pokemon, it just returns it to us. So we don't see a fetch for that. That's the reason why.
And that's this this.
So if you click on Get Pokemon, we're making a call to Poke API. So the Poke API itself implements their own cache.
Oh, I got it. So this library is already kind of just saying like, oh no, you don't need that query. You've already made that query.
Yep.
Got it.
Okay. So now that have gotten like a hang of stuff, right? Of how nanostores works, how TanStack Query works across different frameworks. Let's go back to a more interesting example. So let's go back and open the Pokedex kitchen sink example.
Okay.
So here we have like a Pokedex version, right? We haven't completed it, but we can walk through that. So we have already this React and Solid.JS components there.
Mm-hmm.
You go to SRC components and then Pokedex.
Pokedex.
Yes. And it should have React picture. So React will show the picture of a Pokemon.
Okay.
And Solid stats will show the stats of the Pokemon. So it will draw the graph of like its hit points and all that stuff. So let's first add like an image for the Pokemon itself. So again, it's same as over here. I've already imported the count add subtract from our nanostore, and then we have a use query that does the same thing that we did. If we go to the Pokemon image component that's being rendered on line 26.
26 here.
Yeah, so that's expecting the whole Pokemon data.
Okay.
So we can just put that in the props for our component there. So let's do data equals.
And is it Pokemon query?
Dot data.
Dot
because
data.
the data, yeah.
Okay.
And save it. And now you should see the picture of the Pokemon. And
okay. And
there
so
are
what?
buttons on.
And this is nothing wild is happening here. We're getting the data that we passed in, and then we just dig into that API response to grab the sprites, which is like an image sprite, and then we get the front default, and the name is an alt because we need things to be accessible.
Yes.
And that is dope. Okay.
Yeah. So we also have buttons on these. So if you click on the next button, yeah, so it should
see this color changing in the background. What is happening here?
Yeah, that's a separate component. We can get into it if you have more time. But it's just what it does is that it gets the image for the Pokemon and then extracts the colors on that image to draw the background with that color.
Yeah, that's cool. That's very cool.
Yeah. So if you toggle again to the next Pokemons, just go to a new one. Yeah. Can you see the image flash for a little bit? We probably don't want that, right? We want to keep the previous data until we have a new image URL, right? So there is a function that there's an option on use query that we used to use, which was keep previous data, but now it's not there anymore. Because we are with V5 we are retiring keep previous data in favor of placeholder data. So placeholder data is a more powerful function which can do a lot more stuff and also keep previous data. So it can do more data transformations as well on your query, but we can also just return the previous data. So it takes like a function which will have the arguments will have the previous data. So it'll be so if you go to the
it'd be like previous data. Okay.
And now you can return the previous data over there. And yes, so now
so try to get out to one that we haven't hit yet. See that?
Yes.
So now we don't get that image flash. That's dope. Okay.
So yeah, that's how it works.
That's really cool. And so what this could also do is like if we wanted to say, I don't know, put a shadow silhouette of a Pokemon as loading if we had a really slow API or something, so that it wasn't like click 3 seconds of the previous data and then it flashes in. You could do more here. And the data that we're passing in just has to match whatever the responsive get Pokemon is.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. Cool. So yeah, that totally makes sense. We can kind of get pretty creative here with how we manage our placeholders. But on a fast API like this, I think keeping the previous data makes sense.
Correct. Let's go to the solid stats component next.
Okay.
Here again, same thing. Here, if you look at the example at the bottom, where we are wanting to draw the stats query. So if you go to the GSX, so there's the header component.
Header component.
And then there's a stats graph, right?
Yep.
And stats graph is a component that will draw the graphs for us. And it's expecting, so let's look at the props that it's expecting. No, there's like a, yeah.
Here.
There. So it's expecting an array of label and value. So label of what the stat is and value of the stat value.
Got it.
Right. If you go up on the query now, even more up to the
here
create query. Yes. I actually meant to comment that value. So look at the another option that we're using called select. So if you remove that option.
I'm going to comment it out so you don't have to watch me type that out later.
Yeah. And if you look at stats query, if you hover over stats query, you'll see when we get Pokemon, it should, okay, there's,
do I need
if you look at the types of,
how do I?
Yeah, so if you can look at the create query result, so just look at the type definition of it. So it's going to be a create query result, which will return a Pokemon.
Got it. Okay, so that returns a Pokemon.
Yeah, and let's look at the shape of the Pokemon data. So if you come back to the React Query DevTools on the browser and open the Pokemon one and look at the data there. So it gives you a lot of properties on there, right? It has base experience and all that stuff, and the name of the Pokemon and all that stuff. If you scroll down, you'll see a stats key on there. And that's where we have all the stats for our Pokemon. So there's a base stat, which is the value of the stat. And then there's this nested stat function there.
Oh, here, which also, got it.
So that's the name of the stat that we want to show. So the HP, which is the hit points of a Pokemon, is whatever the value is. The defense is whatever the value is. So that's what we naturally get from a create query call, right?
Right.
And we can't just plug in the data right now as it is in the stats graph component. So if we try to
we'd have to write some kind of like gnarly, we'd have to basically write something like this.
Yes. So every time the query data changes, we'll have to write like a create memo to create a new transformed data for that values. But TanStack Query also comes with an option to do data transformations on your query. So if you uncomment that, what you're doing.
Look at that. Auto type, the completion automatically happened. We get the type back.
Yes. So
that's cool.
You are transforming that query only on the observer level. So even though the picture queried for Pokemon 1, and this is querying for Pokemon 1, the data on stats query is going to be the transform value.
That's so good. Okay, so this doesn't require us to have a separate key. So we're still sharing the cache, but we get a different shape of data. That's so freaking cool. Okay.
And so then when I found about this, so there's a very, very amazing article by Dominique about React Query data transformation. You should definitely check that out. That's how I learned about it, and I have not stopped using it. Yeah, so it'll be tkdodo.eu.
Okay, yeah, tk. Let me just tkdodo.eu, and it was is it select?
Data transformation.
Data transformation.
Yeah.
This one?
So this reason through like why you would transform data inside the select function. But yeah, it's super optimized. So it does like crazy stuff for React as well, where it like maintains the like referential stability. So even if you get like the same query data on the transform data, it won't re-render your values.
That's
It's
very, very,
really
very
amazing.
cool. Dang, what a awesome. All right, this is a heck of a series.
Yep.
That's super cool. Okay, so let's dive back in over here, and I'm gonna close this up. And now look, now we've got our stats in here.
And now if you change the Pokemon, so you get like fancy animation and all that stuff working.
Get all that, and let's get to one that we haven't loaded yet.
Yeah.
Dang, that's
cool. It's all seamless. It's just gonna work as expected. Also, now let's go to the Astro file where all of these components are being drawn.
That is.
So it'll be Pokedex.astro. Yes. And if you scroll down a little bit more, there are two components that are commented out on 38 and 39. So let's uncomment those out and click save. And now we have like queries working for. Yeah, the styling is a little bit off. Worked on my computer. I need to test it down more.
Worked on my machine. No, it's all good. I just have it a little bit narrow over here. So
you can now see the evolution change.
And so this is running in Svelte. This is running in Vue. This is running in Solid. This is running in React. God damn it, that's cool.
Data fetching is really hard in like one framework. We're doing it in like 4 different frameworks with like 10 lines of code.
and let me get in here. Let's look at the thing. So again, 4 frameworks, all sharing queries.
So this is a little bit unoptimized because we have like different functions. It should share the way I created it. I can optimize it, but it should only make one network call. We have like different functions for evolution change, and that's why it's doing multiple calls here.
Oh, because like the evolution chain that's a different call and stuff like that.
I just took a shortcut, but yeah, we can get it to work with just one query being made.
That is extremely cool. I mean, it's still like it's a lot less than it would have been if I had written this myself. That's for dang sure. And this is also maybe the most polished demo we've ever had on this show, like with the colors changing in the background and stuff like that. This is some pretty incredible stuff.
Thank you.
Kind of making me rethink my own. I'm like, man, I need to get better at building demos. Okay, so this is extremely cool, and we're running 4 frameworks. They're all sharing a single store. They are they're managed through React Query and Nano stores, and we've got caching, we've got query deduping, we've got all sorts of fun things going on in here.
Yeah.
What, like, is this one of those like, but wait, there's more kind of things?
Now, we can take a look at the Vue and the Svelte components if you like.
Yeah, let's do it. So we've got the Svelte details, and let me make sure that stays open, and then I'll open up the Vue. Okay, and then I'm going to, well, let's look at, here's the Svelte stuff. Cool, all right.
So pretty similar. We make a query for get types and weaknesses. So this is why we saw multiple calls, because I created like a get types and weaknesses, which again calls the Pokemon API, which shouldn't be doing that. But,
and it
that's
looks
the
like we're
reason
not
why.
using the client in these either.
Yes. So since Svelte Query is like a relatively newer addition to the TanStack Query family, um, there are some bugs, I think, that
Okay.
need to be figured out. So this is the component that needed the query client to provide the client to all these queries. So there's another component called Svelte.Svelte, which does the, so if you look at the, yeah, so
Here.
there's another one. So this is where we're using the query client provider.
I got it. Okay.
Yeah, this you would have to do this for React and Solid for like TanStack Query for V4, but you won't be able won't have to do that for V5. You won't have to do that the same thing for Svelte Query as well, but I think there's a bug that we'll fix. I'll file an issue and we'll get that fixed. So that's fine.
Cool.
But yeah, so you just do the colors query. The colors query just does like loads the image data and then gets the color palette in like HSL. So yeah, so that's where you're getting the Pokemon. We're using like the color thief library, and you create a new image, and then when the image is loaded, we extract the color on line 190. That does that, and then just a simple function
right here.
to change that value from RGB to HSL. It just helps in like creating better gradients.
Yeah. It's cool. So cool.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So love that. And then we can get into, so this is the details, and this all kind of, you know, it's written in Svelte, but we've got the same thing where we're doing the data and we loop through to create some types. All right, let's look at Vue. Okay. And so Vue, single file component, so the template's up top. And then the script is down here.
Yep.
So same kind of thing. We're using the store. We've got add and subtract. We've got a query client in here. And then we're going to use a query, pass in the query itself. And
yep. So over here, it's a little bit different, right? So Vue has their own reactive wrapper, so they have to like create a proxy of the query client. So the query client is a little bit different than the query client, but it shares the same internal. So it's just a wrapper over query client, but it can still have the same guts inside. So what we're just doing is that whatever the query caches we get from the main client and provided it this. It's a little bit more involved, but yeah, it'll make sense once you work with Vue Query.
Got it. And so the way that this works is once you set the query cache, TanStack Query it knows enough to, like, it updates between the original client and the Vue client. So that when we're in here in the Vue component, when we're changing things, we still get that.
Yeah. So when we provide the client.query cache, get query cache, we're getting the cache from the common store that we created, common client that we created, and we're putting it in this new query client. So it's still sharing the same query cache between all the requests. So even if you make a request on Solid JS component, it will share that same query cache to the Vue component as well.
Very, very cool. Okay. All right, I'm with you.
Yeah, and then just the same, you do get the data and then you get the colors. Again, I'm using select where I'm getting the first HSL value, but keeping the other two same to do the names and return that. And then I return all these, which I then use on my template above.
Very, very cool. Yeah. This is some pretty impressive stuff. I love I love how, like, I don't write a lot of Vue. And this doesn't look unfamiliar if I've been using the patterns in
Yes.
React and Solid, which I'm more familiar with, Svelte, which I'm a little more familiar with. I don't feel like I'm completely out of my element. And that is great because sometimes I feel like even if a library has been ported between different frameworks, the differences are just subtle and weird enough that I can't figure out how to, like, why, but it works over here. Why doesn't it work over here? And you have to become an expert in the framework to understand the nuances and how the tools work. And I really like that we're starting to bridge those gaps and make it feel more unified, right? That I think is a great update.
So before this demo, I didn't know any Vue at all. But just looking at different libraries, it's just similar how every library implements their own like life cycle. So it was pretty easy to get this to work. And then the fact that we're using TanStack Query everywhere. So the syntax for TanStack Query is almost the same in all these frameworks. So that helps a lot. So if you're using like utility libraries, like which are framework agnostic, you can easily switch between different frameworks, and it should.
Yeah, because I feel like that's sort of the hurdle for a lot of devs, for me at least, is not the like how to template. Like I can go and build a template in Vue or Svelte or Angular or React or Solid or Preact or Lit or whatever really fast, because the templating part is what's super intuitive with all of these. That's what they're all really, really good at. Where I end up getting tripped up is when you have to start getting into their internals. This is how we do reactivity. This is how we do caching. This is how we do all these other pieces that are, unique to the architecture of the framework, that are unique to the preferences of the framework authors. And those things just, that, for better or worse, it's just the way people choose to build things. And they don't usually line up one-to-one. If you like the way that React does re-rendering on every data change, then signals are going to be confusing because they don't do that. If you like signals, then React is going to be super annoying because it re-renders every time data changes. And getting your head to think in those mental models takes a while. So being able to port big chunks of logic around through an agnostic tool, what a game changer.
It's amazing. Every time I take a look at any of these TanStack Query examples that people put out, it just blows my mind. So, I mean, we can talk about other stuff as well a little bit. I think we have time, right?
Yeah. Did you have more that you wanted to show?
Sure. We can talk about a little bit about like SSR with TanStack Query v5. So again, let's open the network tab on the page itself. And let's take a look at so reload the page.
Okay, I'm going to do a hard refresh.
Yeah, and instead go filter by all.
Okay.
And take a look at the first query that happens in the waterfall, which is the Pokedex. Yeah, so that's the response. So let's look at the response, or like the preview of the response.
Preview of the response.
Okay. So right now, everything is loaded on the client. So we're rendering the queries on the client. We're drawing all the colors on the client. There's no way right now to SSR, or like SSR is not working on these examples. So let's take a look at how we can achieve SSR on TanStack Query using a TanStack Query and Astro. So if you click on the Astro plus TanStack Query Pokedex example, it should take you back to the home page. And then let's look at the last one, which is this one. So this is an example with Solid Query. There are ways to do it with the other adapters as well. It's a little bit more involved, but we can talk about it. And if anybody has questions about it, we can create a demo for that. But over here, you'll see we're already drawing that graph on the server and then sending it down to the client. So if you...
And it's rehydrated.
So again, let's just, if you close the network tab, and let's go to VS Code and open where this so it should be in SSR directory for components.
Oh, the components directory. Got it. Components,
Yes.
SSR. Okay.
Yeah, so it should be SSR stats. So that's where we're making the stats for the query.
Okay.
And if you scroll down a little bit more, you'll see that's the query that we're making. So we have a query, we have doing the same thing, and we are defining a stale time of 60 seconds over here.
Okay.
Right? And now if you reload the page on the left side and take a look at the React Query Dev Tools.
Tools.
You'll see the query has been hydrated, and it also remembers your stale time, which you set it on the server. So
okay, and the stale time. Where do you see that?
You can't see the stale time, but you can see that the query is fresh.
Oh, that it's
when
fresh.
it's green.
I get it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you go to the next page, it's rehydrated on the client, so you can fetch the other queries on the client. So that's how it works. Let's see how it works actually. So if we look at the ssr.astro file.
ssr.astro. Here.
So that's the page. And look at the front matter there. So what we're doing is we are preloading and we're making a call to get stats, which is just a get stats function from the Pokemon API. And then we pass this as initial data to our SSR stats component below. So we pass stats over here.
So this is our initial data, which we pass in here, and then that is grabbed out of here. We have our stats value label, so that's the select that we looked at before. And then
over here, if you just remove that function from initial data and just do props.stat, that should also work. So just remove the whole function there. No, just keep the initial data key there.
I got you. So we're doing props.stats.
Yeah. So it still works, right? It's still SSR is correct. And this is how you would use query on the client as well. So it's not different from how you would do client-side rendering and SSR.
So the only difference here between, like, if we didn't have this initial data, then it would refresh on initial page load.
Yes.
Because we're passing in initial data, it's going to check what the initial data is and whether or not it matches this query key, which should be 1, right? Like if we passed in 1, which is Bulbasaur, but then initialize the count at, say, 2, that would be a mismatch, which would cause it to immediately requery. But because we're passing in the same thing, then it's going to say, oh, I already have 1, so let me just put that up here. And we know it's fresh because it's good for 60 seconds. So we don't have to reload. Now look, we've been watching for more than 60 seconds, so it just marked itself as stale, so it's going to requery next time we come back to it.
Yeah.
So cool.
Interesting. Yes. Yeah. And I have like a small...
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Okay, I'll go. We have like an example for SSRing the name of the Pokemon as well, if you want to take a look at that. We can do that. So just SSR name. So yeah, it's already commented out. So you can do the same thing here, which is uncomment that whole thing out.
Okay. And so this is a create query, same query key. We're going to go with the Pokemon and the count. We load the Pokemon. And then we can pass in initial data.
The Pokemon query itself has a different query key. So this says Pokemon comma count. The other one is Pokemon stats comma count.
Ah, right. Yes. Okay. So these are two different queries.
Yes, and now you can just do uncomment the h1 tag at the bottom. But you still need to pass in the initial props on the Astro stats, the Astro file. So you'll have to prefetch this Pokemon.
And to do that, I'm going to const Bulbasaur equals await get Pokemon 1, because that's the ID of Bulbasaur. And then down here, I need to pass in, I renamed it. So we'll,
yeah.
But there we go.
Yep.
And now we're
and
getting,
it's SSR.
It's SSR'd. So if I go back to my dev tools, and again, what we did is because it's in the front matter of Astro, this is what happens on the server side. So during the build, it'll load our Bulbasaur. And then
so if you reload the page, you'll see there's no network calls being made on the client because we already have the data for it.
It's here. Yeah. Yes. So here we go. No network calls. Very, very cool stuff.
Yeah. I think we blasted past through all the examples.
No, this is great. I mean, so and honestly, we're at a great stopping point here. So, man, I got to say the TanStack OSS team is really raising the bar for demos on this show, because when Dominic came on, it was one of the most well-prepared shows. I've linked to it already, but let me just link one more time to the show because it was so good.
I saw his example and I'm like, okay, I need to follow that up. So I need to do something.
But so
it was a great stream.
Yeah, and I think you've risen to the occasion. This is an absolutely stellar example. It went so well. I'm really just very bullish on where framework dev is going right now. I'm really excited to see this framework agnostic approach. I'm very excited to see this idea of like, how do we make defaults so good that we don't have to think about how I'm going to implement this. I just use whatever framework I like, implement these tools like NanoStore or TanStack Query that kind of remove the need for me to think about how I'm going to share state or to think about how I'm going to do query deduping and caching, etc. And now I just go get to build value, right? I'm not figuring out how to structure my code. I'm figuring out how to build the features that I wanted to build so that the people I'm trying to help get help, right? I'm not out here trying to reinvent wheels that honestly don't need to be reinvented. So that is really, really exciting stuff. So Aryan, where should people go if they want more, like if they want to go further with this?
Yeah, I have posted the GitHub repo of all these examples on the Twitch chat. If anybody wants to take a look at these examples, work with them.
Great.
And yeah, usually all the conversations. So TanStack is expanding really fast. If you have been following Tanner, he's been working on some amazing stuff that just flies through my brain. So now if you look at the TanStack products on this website, look at the amount of frameworks that are going to be coming out from TanStack. So the Discord channel is the best place to ask questions, reach out to people, share ideas on how to do stuff with TanStack stuff. And yeah, everybody will be very happy to answer your questions. If you have any bug reports, do talk about it there, or you can create GitHub issues there as well. So
yeah, the Discord is wonderful. It's very active. Aryan, this has been great. So why don't we give one more shout out to your Twitter? This was make sure you go and give a follow for more incredible demos like the one we just saw today. And I'm going to do another shout out to our captioning. We've had Rachel from Whitecoat Captioning here all day. Thank you so much. That is made possible through the support of our sponsors. Got Netlify, NX, New Relic, and Pluralsight all kicking in to make this show more accessible to more people. Thank you very much. And we've got so much good stuff coming up on the schedule. Make sure you go and bookmark this page. Subscribe on Twitch, subscribe on YouTube, wherever you do your subscribing, get in there. We're going to have some internal mobile dev. We are going to have Jason Ball on building some WP GraphQL stuff. If you work with clients, this is a really good stack. We have Mark Erickson, the maintainer of Redux, coming on to do time travel debugging, which if you've never seen that before is extraordinarily cool. We've got Daniel from the New Relic team coming back, and then Sunil Pai, whose image is apparently broken, is coming back to talk about his new project, Party Kit, which is like real-time collaboration. If you've seen that new demo of TL Draw where like everybody can draw at the same time, that's Sunil's work, what he's working on now. So we're going to play with that on stream. I'm very, very excited to have Sunil back.
I keep watching. Yeah, I keep going back to Sunil Pai's videos that you have on the episode. He's amazing.
Sunil is one of my absolute favorite people to talk to about like the future, about what is going on with all my. So all of my images are broken. That's fun. I'm going to just drop a link to this, and I'll go figure out why everything broke. Anyways, with that being said. Aryan, thank you so much for taking some time. Any final words for the chat before we call this one done?
No, thank you for having me. It's been a wonderful experience to show off all the stuff that we're doing with TanStack Query. Shout out to the other contributors, like maintainers on TanStack Query. There is Damien, who works on Vue Query. I think Lachlan is the name. Maybe I'm butchering the name, but he's the one who works on Svelte.JS. Dominique works on React Query. But there are way more contributors now that keep coming up with pull requests on TanStack Query, and we're grateful for all of them. That's it.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Aryan, this has been so much fun. Chat, we're going to go find somebody to raid. We will see you all next time.